Intricacy, where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the book 10 Little Rules for a Double-Bodied Adventure, no other than Miss Terry M Brown.
Hi, how are you today? I'm so glad to be here.
I'm fabulous, Miss Terry. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Absolutely. So, as you said, I'm an author, but in addition to 10 Little Rules for a Double Butted Adventure, I also have three historical fiction novels, and I have a children's picture book. I'm also a host for Online for Authors, which is a podcast. I am a co host for the Terry and Edith show, and I'm just about to start what I'm calling a bite sized podcast called The Book Hook. Um, and on top of that, I also do public speaking. So that's kind of what I do.
Well, Miss Terry, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So let's talk about the 10 little rules of a double-butted adventure. Let's start with the brilliant and curious title. What adventure and what does the phrase encapsulate about the book's philosophy?
Yeah, so a double butted adventure was something my husband and I took. We rode across the United States from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C. on a tandem bicycle. So that's a two-seated bicycle. We rode 3,102 miles to fulfill a big dream of my husband's to help me figure myself out again after having been in an emotionally abusive relationship before I met him. And then we also raised money for Toys for Tots.
The title feels both whimsical and deeply practical too. How does the book balance playful adventure with that serious life advice?
You know, I think that we learn serious life advice by doing things like adventure and by getting outside of our box. We have this tendency to sit inside of this nice, safe box that we make for ourselves. And when we venture outside of it and try something new and exciting, that's when we learn and that's when we grow. The trip that we took was fantastic. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of good times and a lot of laughter. I also learned a lot, and it was one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life.
The term double butted is a cycling term referring to a stronger spoke. Is this a metaphor for building resilience, or how does that imagery fuel the book's message?
Yeah, so double butted. The reason I came up with the idea for the blog originally, I called ourselves Double Butted Adventures, was because it was two butts on one bike, and I thought that would be funny, two butts. My husband, however, told me that, oh, you named it double butted because of the way a tandem bicycle's made. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, when you do something like a tandem bicycle, you need the steel to be strong, but it also needs to be lightweight. So they thin it out in the center and they keep it strong on the ends where they have to do the welding. And that's called double butting. And so here we have this amazing thing where I'm both funny and we're doing this amazing adventure and having this, I don't know, like engineering thing, which is so my husband.
Mm. So, Mystery, was there specific, perhaps a double-butted adventure in your own life that was a catalyst for distilling your experience into these 10 rules?
When we got back from this adventure, I had a real hard time believing that we had made it. Because you do not ride from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C. You ride on a Wednesday. And when that Wednesday's over, you put the ride away. And then you ride on Thursday. And when Thursday's ride's over, you put it away. And then you ride on Friday. And when you add them all up, all of a sudden you've ridden across the United States. Well, I was having trouble, I don't know, realizing that it just didn't feel real to me. So I started reading the blog posts that I had kept. And while I was reading those posts, I started to recognize that there were these things that I had learned along the way. And I started gathering those and cataloging them and figuring out what would point to that, what would show that, what would be a good example for that. And so that's where the book came from. I didn't plan to write this book. I knew I would write something, but this book came because all of a sudden I realized, wow, I learned some really amazing things along the way.
Of the 10 rules, which one of the most counterintuitive or surprising? The rule that goes against conventional adventure wisdom.
So the one that I think people find surprising is the one that I said was enjoy the downhills. People would assume that of course you're going to enjoy going downhill. That's the easiest part of riding a bicycle. But I didn't for the first several days because we had to work really, really hard going up. And we were going over mountain ranges. And we would go up and we would go up and we would go up. And finally we would get to the top. We would fly down only to have to start all over again and go back up. So I wasn't enjoying going up. I was also not enjoying going down. And so I had to learn to accept the downhills for what they were. Like when life's easy, enjoy it. You know, don't be worried about what's coming up.
Definitely. And adventures are often planned, but they always go off script.
They
Is
do.
there a rule specifically for embracing chaos and unexpected?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely talked a lot about the idea that plans don't, well, as my husband, who was in the military, said, plans do not survive first contact with the enemy. So inevitably, we would think we would have a plan, and then the weather would change, or the road situation would change, or our ability that day would change because we were tired or we were just emotionally, it was a hard day. And you had to make changes quickly. You had to be able to pivot very quickly. And I talked a lot about that because that bothered me. I liked having a plan, sticking to the plan, working the plan. And Bruce would tell me all the time, we have the same goal. We're getting across the United States. It's just the logistics have changed a little. So I had to get really used to that idea. That was a hard thing for me.
For sure. And some adventure are physical, some are professional, some are personal. Do these rules apply to all types of adventure and how are they adaptable?
Yeah, I tell people all the time that this isn't about bicycling. And it's not even about doing something physical like running a marathon, though it can be applied to that. It's about living life and trying to get outside of that box that we put ourselves in. And all of these rules talk about that idea of living more adventurously and whatever that means to you. It could be as simple as moving to a new location, it could be starting a new relationship. It could be ending a relationship that's no longer working for you. It could be changing your job. It could just be figuring out what you're going to do when your kids move out of the house. All of those things in our lives where we're making those changes and we're trying to figure out what's next. These rules really help.
Definitely, it will help for sure. If you had to combine all 10 rules in one overarching principle, what would it be?
Boy, that's hard. That's like how do you take 10 and bring it down to 1? I think what I would say overall to people are two things. One is that you have inside of you everything you need to be successful. You just have to find it. You have to pull it out. The world sometimes dumps on top of you and you no longer believe in yourself. And I think that if you find a way to like brush yourself off, you'll realize that what you have inside is what's necessary. And the other thing that I like to remind people is to get rid of your bucket list. You don't want to leave this earth with a list of things that you wish that you had done. Instead, look at that list, find something you really want to do, and then find something today that you can do to get started with it.
Yes, definitely. And on the practical application and mindset, for someone who feels stuck in a rut, which rule would you tell them to focus on first to just get moving on?
I think one of the ones that has helped me, especially when I'm feeling stuck, is do hard things. You know, it's easy to just stay in the place that you're comfortable. But if you stay there, then you're not going to make the changes that you need. So you can do hard things, and you kind of need to do hard things in order to move on. So take a look around you, figure out what it is that you want, what's hard about that. Focus on that piece and then work towards that. Because once you get over that initial hump of difficulty, then things start to move along like they should.
Definitely, sure, for sure. And tell us, Miss Terry, how does the book address the fear of the holds people back from starting their own adventure, whether fear or failure or judgment or the
Right.
unknown?
Exactly. I think I actually have a rule that has the word fear in it. I'm looking it up. I can't remember all of the rules. Do hard things, expect setbacks. I guess know your why and set aside fear. Those are the two rules that I have. So y- you have to be able to look fear in the face, recognize what it is, and it's often not real. I had a fear of going over the Rocky Mountains. We were going to have to go over the Rocky Mountains on a tandem bicycle, pulling a trailer, and that idea just terrified me for days as we're approaching this. And it turns out that getting over the Rocky Mountains was difficult, but it was not the most difficult thing that we did on the trip. And it wasn't anything for me to have spent all that time worrying about. So I remind people that a lot of times what we fear is it's just in our heads. It's not real. And the way I deal with fear is I say, what's the very worst thing that can happen? And I most of the time it's not that bad. You know, like I have a fear of walking into a bookstore and asking them if they'll put my book out. I don't know why it just terrifies me. But I remind myself all the time that I already don't have my book there. And if I go in and ask them and they say no, I still don't have my book there. Nothing has changed. So it isn't anything to be afraid of.
Adventure often implies going it alone, but double budget suggests strength in pairs. How important is community, partnership, or a support crew in this framework?
I think that a person who is doing it alone could get everything they need from this framework. For me, I don't know that I could have done this kind of adventure alone. I'm not a cyclist. When I started this, I hadn't been on a bicycle in 40 years. So having someone with me that knew what they were doing, that helped me kind of keep my fears a little more at bay, because I knew I had someone who knew how to handle some basic problems. But even if you're going it alone, I think that community is always necessary. You need people in your corner who tell you that you're going to make it, or can give you good ideas, or offer suggestions or tips.
Mystery, what's the difference between a double-butted adventure and just being reckless? Is there a rule for calculating risk versus reward?
I think that the difference between an adventure and recklessness is planning. You know,
Yes.
we did not just say, "Oh, we're going to ride across the United States." Instead, we did 1,000 miles of practice riding, training riding. We went over the bicycle with a fine tooth comb and we knew that it was okay. We made sure we had a toolbox that had all of the things that we needed in it. We never rode without 2 or 3 days worth of instant meals that you could just add water and have food. You need to make sure that you're thinking in terms of, if something went wrong, do we have what we need to fix that? And then if you do that, then I don't think it's reckless.
On storytelling and humor, the title promises a sense of humor. Does the book use stories of your own misadventure and failures to illustrate these rules?
Absolutely. I am nothing but if not honest. And I'm not a cyclist. Like I said, I had not been on a bicycle in 40 years when I decided that this was something I was going to do with Bruce. And I tell everything. I talk about standing on the side of the road crying. I talk about, you know, not knowing the terminology of the bike. I talk about all of the crazy things that were going on in my mind. I think that being honest is the only way to really talk about an adventure. I read a lot of blogs before we went, and I don't think most of them were honest. I felt like they just showed you the end of the day where they were standing triumphant at the last stop. And although that's wonderful to see them standing triumphant, I like to know how they got there and was it easy? And so you'll hear about the time that I begged my husband to call Uber and we were in the middle of nowhere. And the time where I got really distraught and told him that I was done. I was just done. I'm not getting back on the bicycle. And so it was just, I think being honest is the best way to talk about rules, because otherwise it sounds like, oh, I know everything and I'm perfect and you need these rules. And the truth is that I needed these rules.
Little rules suggest accessibility rather than a rigid, overwhelming system. Was it conscious choice to make the advice feel approachable and bite sized?
Absolutely. I'm only an expert in me, right? I
Yes.
don't know you. I don't know what you need. In fact, at the end of every chapter, I have questions and I even have places for you to write and journal to decide, is this rule right for you? And if not, how would you change it for you?
Yes, definitely. And if this book had a soundtrack, what would it sound like? What kind of music scores a double-barreled adventure?
You know, it would be so varied and it would depend on where we were. Um, there was one day when we were in Michigan and I felt like we were flying. It was beautiful. We had rolling hills, the exact perfect conditions for riding. And I felt like at any moment we might actually lift up off the road and just start soaring. And that music would have been just this beautiful, full orchestra, just soaring type music. On the last 2 miles over the Rockies, when I couldn't catch my breath, when we had to push the bicycle, when I was sure we weren't going to make it, when I wanted to lay on the side of the road and sob, it would be completely different music. So I think the score would be all over the place and it would just depend where we were at the time.
It depends, people. So, what is one piece of gear, either literal or metaphorical, that you deem essential for anyone embarking on their adventure?
Uh, I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Which one of the piece of gear, either literal or metaphorical, that you deem essential for everyone embarking on their adventure?
Yeah, I think that it would have to be the right frame of mind. It isn't so
Yes.
much a thing as much as it's a mindset. Like you have to have the right mindset. If you want something, you can make it happen. If you don't want something, everything will make you stop.
Yes, definitely. And how do you hope reader feels differently after reading this book than they did before they pick it up?
I want them to feel like they now have a sense of how to get started on doing something bigger and bolder than what they were doing when they picked up the book. And it doesn't have to be a 3,000-mile ride across the United States. But just feeling like I now know some things that are going to help me be a little bolder in my life, do things a little bigger, a little better, a little more adventurous.
Is the finish line of an adventure the goal, or is it something else? How does your book redefine success?
So, one of my rules is to make sure you do define your success. And the reason for that is when my husband and I first got started, we had this idea that we would have to ride every mile to be successful. Turns out that's not possible. There are times where you have to push the bike because the hill is too steep. You just can't go up it that way. There was a point where there was 10 miles of road that had been completely dug up down to the roadbed, and they were doing road construction, and we could not ride across that. And we had to be ferried across. There was another time where there was a huge storm coming. We weren't going to have enough time to get to our next spot, and we had someone put us in their truck and take us. If we had stuck with the idea that we had to ride every mile, then we would have failed, even if we had successfully made it across the United States. So I say that you really need to define your success. What is success for you? And don't make it so that something small will derail you completely. So instead, what we said was, is we're going to make it from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C. We're going to ride as many of those miles as humanly possible, and we're going to accept help when we need it. So I think there's a goal is part of success, but I think it's also the process.
The process, indeed. And Miss Sari, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my Abstract Essay is already in fifth season, Abstract Poetry in second season, and my Book 101 Review in fifth season too, Comedy 101 in second season, and my Food 101 in fifth season as well, Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in third season, and Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in each first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Terry, finally, if this book is a map, what is the X that marks the spot? What is the ultimate treasure a reader will find by following these rules?
I think they're going to find more joy in their life. They're going to be able to live life a little more freely and believe in themselves more.
Believe in yourself, people. And for sure, your dreams will come true. Make it, materialize it. And Miss Terry M Brown, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books, your advocacy, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Yes, so you can head over to my website, which is my name, terrymbrown.com. And that's Terry with one R. And there you can find everything I'm doing, including all of my books and my podcasts.
Yes, tell us about your podcast, Miss Terry.
Yeah, so my podcast is online for authors, and I talk with other authors about their books. And so it's a great place for people to learn about what next book they might want to read.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Teri M Brown, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering books like this, more and more empowering of episodes of the podcast itself. So, Miss Terry, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.